Today, we're going to talk about why movies get it so wrong. Not only movies, novels, stories. And I want to title today's shir, The Problem with Stories. What do I mean? Nobody loves a good story more than I do, I think. There's nothing as amazing and captivating as being just transformed by a well-told story, especially when it's visual, not just audio, but even if it's written in a book, there's nothing like a great story. The problem is that stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the way you write a story, right? The beginning usually is describing their life, the middle is the challenges they're going through, and the end is somehow some form of conclusion. I remember one time I was watching a filmmaker describe the rules of making films. And the problem is, once he taught it to me, it ruined a big part of film enjoyment. The reason is because he kind of let me into a secret. And the secret is that every movie will start off with, obviously, with a tale, and it will be going in one direction, and inevitably, at some stage, towards the beginning, middle of the movie, it's going to change direction. And then always just before the end, something's going to happen to almost collapse everything. Everything seems like it's coming to an end, and then it sorts itself out. And he had a term for it. And the truth is, ever since then, like when I'm watching a movie and like I'm following, I know that if I see there's 10 minutes left to the movie, I know that sometime in the next minute or two, everything's going to collapse. He and she are going to break up. And then eventually they're going to work it out and come back together. But it's inevitable, right? Because a story has a structure. A movie has a structure. A novel has a structure. The problem is that life isn't like that. Life doesn't always have beginning, middles, and ends. Often you just stay in the middle forever until the end comes. But there's no conclusion to the story. There's no closure to the story. The struggle is just there. But the problem I'm finding in myself, I can't talk for anybody else, is I think often too much in a story, like that life is a story. So I'm going through a challenge, and at some stage it just all wraps up and everything makes sense. Sometimes, not always, sometimes it just is. You continue struggling and struggling and struggling. For those of you who are in a very difficult marriage, there is no closure. It's just, unless you end the marriage, but even that comes with its own package. You have a difficult child, you have a difficult illness, physical illness, mental illness. There is it's not necessarily a story. It doesn't necessarily come with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It just is. And the problem that I find why stories are, I won't call dangerous, but problematic, is we're always waiting for the story to wrap up, for it to just be packaged well. Okay, now I know why God did this to me. Now I know why I struggle with this. Now I know why I have this issue. Now I know this. Now I know that. Sorted, I'm good. But really? Is it always like that? And for me, COVID is a perfect example of something that, one day it's going to wrap itself up. But right now it's not wrapping up. It's just going and going and going. But in our minds, we're expecting 1 second. Okay, so where does this wrap up? What's the end? Now, of course, there will be an end. Everything comes to an end. And if it doesn't end, at least death is there. I'm saying, like, whatever, a person could struggle their whole life and eventually they pass away and that's the end. But you can't. Living with that need for closure is problematic because it means I'm not living now. And I'm only going to be okay when I understand why something's happening to me. Chief Rabbi Sachs, the late Chief Rabbi Sachs, who passed away recently, says, I really want to understand all the events that happened in my life, and I have a lot of questions of why, but I'm in no rush to get there, because I know that the only time I'm going to get those answers is in heaven. In this world, sometimes you get like, wow, closure. Now I understand why it happened. I get it. And there's moments in my life that I look back and I say, I know why I had to go through that challenge. This is what it led to. But there's a lot of times of just, it just is. You're stuck in a complicated, messy situation. And the question then is, how do you find meaning when you're not in a story? When it's not this beautifully wrapped, story that has all the right characters, and one day you wake up, like in all these stories and movies, a person will be very stubborn, a person won't get it, and one day they just get it. And oh, wow, that's what I should do. But in life, often people don't ever get it. There's no aha moments by some people. There's no growth. In every story you've ever read, the character grows. That's part of what makes a story intriguing. The character might start off very stubborn and eventually soften up. The character might start too soft and eventually learn how to stand up for themselves. But a big part of novels is the ability of character development, the ability of taking a good character. And the writers that you love, chances are you love their characters more than even their stories. Like, you just identify with their characters when they describe this person and the challenges they have. You connect, you resonate, you kind of live through those characters. But in life, some of us grow, some of us don't. Life isn't always a story. Life is often the opposite of a story. It just is. And yes, some of us maybe are more talented in making stories out of life. Like, there's a guy I know, he's an awesome storyteller. And he literally can regale you with story after story after story for hours on end. And I sometimes wonder, like, do more stories happen to him than to me? And some people do. But also, he just has the ability of creating a narrative out of things that happen, and just like putting events together to make a narrative. Most of us, that's just life. And yes, it's nice to have stories, it's inspiring. But when the story means that I can only find meaning and purpose when things wrap themselves up nicely, that's dangerous. Because then I can't live here, now, whatever my challenge is. I need closure, I need answers, I need it to just work. And I think what stimulated this, this thought process is often you have family members, you have friends, you have people you know and you care about who you know what they should do, or at least you think you know what they should do, but they can't help themselves. They're stuck. They're the one in the mess. And sometimes you're just helpless because you know what they need to do. Just get this part of your life in order and everything will be okay. And they can't do it. And then it's an exercise in patience, an exercise in just allowing them to make the mistakes of their lives, even though you know that they're just going to take themselves to nowhere. But unlike the movies, they might never get it. Some people die as shallow as they lived. Some people don't. So is this supposed to be a depressing thought? No. But it inspires me, rather, because what it tells me is, if I don't have to wait for the conclusion of the story, and if not everything in my life has a beginning, a middle, and end, then I can find meaning now. I don't have to wait to the end of the book and figure out, did they solve the murder? Did he and she come together? I don't need that. I could find meaning now in the life I have, even if there is no closure. And one thing I've learned as a rabbi, meeting so many people and listening to so many people's stories, is most of our lives are not pretty stories. They're not great beginning, middle, and end. Some of them are just messy. Person who had a difficult relationship with the parent and it's still difficult. A person who had an abusive marriage and it's still abusive. A child who doesn't get it and they still don't get it. And yet, Hashem tells me, find meaning and happiness in this messy life you have. And I remember how naive I was when I was a child, and I imagine many of you were that way as well, unless you went through a serious trauma as a child. As a child, you really, really don't appreciate how messy life is. I mean, you have dynamics, you have kids in class who are mean, and you have bullies, and you have parents who are fighting, and you have you have life, but you don't realize how complex and multifaceted the human being is. The human being is the single most complex organism on this planet. And I don't have to talk about anybody else. Think about yourself. Think how complicated you are. And even if people might see you as predictable, you know how many layers and motivations and positive and negative forces and healthy and unhealthy parts and talents and weaknesses. The cholent pot that is the human being is just amazing, actually. We are the most complex organism on this world. Now, often when we talk about other people, we don't see it that way. We define people very easily. Oh, she's a loser. She's super sweet. He's a mensch. Okay, and like that somehow paints that picture. Aha, that's what they are. But we know it. We're so much more than that. And we're incredibly complex, incredibly complex. And because of the complexity, sometimes or very often our life is very messy. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. There's a lot of good of it, but we are as messy as the life that we have around us. And often our energy attracts to us similar to who we are. In other words, because most of us are complicated, we gravitate towards complexity and we bring towards us a lot of complexity. And that's just life. Life is messy. And in this life, God comes and says, find me, find meaning, find purpose, grow beyond yourself, try to find godliness, try to find spirituality, try to find purpose. Not because it's going to solve anything. It's not. It doesn't. But because it will help you navigate better. It will help you make sense of this better. And I have to say that, forgive me for saying this, that it's no secret that the last few weeks, the religious Jewish world has not done itself any favors by the way it behaves, by the PR it's giving itself, the public relations fiascos of big funerals and big weddings, etc. And I'm not going to defend, because how could I defend? There's nothing to defend. It's wrong. But it's been a very hard process for me, because what do you mean? These are people who grew up with Torah, and the Torah tells us the value of life. And then I have to accept within myself that just because they study Torah doesn't take away their complexity. And if they want to, or if their teachers are not guiding them how to apply Torah correctly, it doesn't make them necessarily any better at making decisions than anybody else. And that's been a hard thing for me to watch. You know, many of my so-called co-religiousness, so-called because I hate that word, but many people who I appreciate and like, and good people, being totally wrong in my opinion, obviously, in their choices they're making, and and definitely wrong in the image they're portraying to the world. And for me, again, it reminds me that selling Torah as a solution to complexity is not the answer. However, if a person takes Torah and is honest with himself and doesn't ask themselves, how can I make Torah fit my agenda, but rather, how can I understand Torah's agenda and lose my ego in it, then it's good. In other words, Torah can be abused like anything else in this world. Even the sages talk about somebody who uses Torah simply as a hammer for their own agenda. To be able to come with an open mind and say, Torah, what do you have to tell me? To not let politics get involved, to not let, because again, we are so messy. You could listen to a shir, and not Afton's kind of shir, which is more of a conversation. You could listen to a shir straight out of the Chumash, straight out of the Torah, listen to a full Chumash and totally misinterpret everything you're reading to fit your agenda. I've said it many times that one of the things about giving drushas, and this week, thank God we're back in shul, so all are welcome to come here at drasha. One of the things about hearing drushas is it's already become so predictable who likes what drasha. Why? Because at least the people in the community who I know, and there's quite a few people I know, and I've sat down and had conversations, I know their worldview. So I know which speech I give will fit their worldview and which one will negate it. And if they negate it, if I negate their worldview, then when they walk out of shul, it's going to be Shabbos Rav, Shkoyach. But if I supplement their worldview and I give validation and I agree with them, then they come out, Shkoyach Rav, that drasha was incredible. That was on target. Obviously, it was on target. I told you what you wanted to hear. G'daisa Gedula, big genius. We all love, we all love feeling validated for our opinions. But to actually walk over and say, you know what, Rabbi, I always thought about things that way, and you got me thinking, I don't know if I agree with you, but that opened my mind. That is a good drasha. That means the drasha had impact. Because to confirm what you already know, that doesn't need. Torah is not there to fit your agenda. Torah is not there that we create God in our image. Torah is there for us to see the truth for what it is. So back to where I started, the complexity of life. For me, one of the only ways to really navigate life's complexity is the only way is seeing truth and being above our lives, not getting lost in our lives, not becoming so petty that all that matters in our lives is what clothing we wear, what food we eat, what makeup we bought, who we socialize with, what we think of ourselves, what we look in the mirror, what car we're driving. All that stuff is nice and great. I'm not saying any of it's not nice. But if that's what I get locked up into, and that's all, then me and life, I'm in life and life's in me. I'm not standing above it. I'm in the mess. I'm not able to stand outside the mess. But if I'm able to learn new ideas, make sure that my mind is straight, even if my emotions are all over the place, my mind is straight. And I know what I want, and I know I have perspective, and I don't allow my emotions to control my reality, then I'm living a great life. The problem with most of us is that we give into life and we just let life drown us. We take our head and we put it into the water of life. Drown ourselves in life, all the sorrows of life and the challenges of life. The problem is if you and life are all enmeshed and you're not able to stand above it, then you're pretty much, sorry for saying it this way, you're like any other organism in this world. You're like an animal or a tree. You're just part of life. The ability of being a human being and having a mind is standing outside of life. The ability to analyze, to think, to reflect, to think objectively about things, to not get lost in the messiness. That is the gift of life. That's the gift of being human, rather. But if I allow life to consume me, then I get lost in life, then I'm like any other organism. The lion that fits into this world. You know what, people always say that the human being is the one that came and destroyed the world. The world ran so naturally without the human being. And it's true. But that's the way God created it. Everything else in this world just fits. There's a flow in this world. The animal, the tree, the vegetation, the rock, the mountain, the climate, everything fits. Then comes the human being who has the power of free choice. and the power to think out of the box and to become either great or terrible. And they are the one that takes the whole world and takes it out of sync because they don't fit. The problem is if we allow ourselves to fit, if we allow ourselves to get lost, or if even worse, if we become destructive, obviously. As human beings, we cannot I don't know how to say this because I know many of you are pet lovers. We cannot become our pets. I know your dog is cute and your cat, there's nothing better in the world than your magnificent cat. But you're a human and they're a cat. And as much as you're going to try to convince me that they have a spirituality that you don't have, fantastic. But you're a human being and you're not here to be a cat. Neither are you here to be a baby. We're here to be adults. We're here to be able to stand outside of our situation. I have a, by the way, just, to be mean, because why not? It's nice to be mean. I have a philosophy that goes like this. Every dog or cat you have at home is another baby you should have had, but the dog was easier. Because the dog doesn't talk back to you. Have 8 kids, and I promise you won't want to have a cat. That was just mean. I know. Come on, Rabbi, it's not like that. But yeah, let's be honest. Dogs are much easier than babies. But we're not here to be dogs. We're not here to be cats. We're here to be humans. And to be a human being is to stand outside the situation, to reflect, to not become part of the problem. And when I look at the politics out there, when I look at the craziness of American politics now, and in general, like geopolitical, like the whole world, very often, you just see an incredible amount of groupthink. Everybody just thinking what the next person thinks of, and pretty much seeing the world through very narrow lenses and inability of having a liberal mind. And when I mean liberal, I mean liberated. A mind that sits there saying, okay, there might be another perspective. I have to reflect about this. I'm not so sure. Open to new ideas. Open to stand outside and say, you know what? I'm sick and tired of kvetching about the same COVID for 12 months. I need to get something. I need to move on. It's getting boring to kvetch about this, guys. It really is. As the expression goes, and I think this is a good expression for COVID, I'm trying to make sure I get it right. So what? Now what? In other words, okay, fine, that's the situation. Now what? What are we going to do about it? Now what? I think we're still stuck in the first part. We're like, yeah, but now what? Guys, let's stand outside of this. What opportunities do we have this year? What will we make out of this year? What will we make out of our lives? What will we celebrate? Yeah, shul's not going to be the same as it is for a long time. 2022, 2023, God knows when. We're not going to have the shul with the bracha and the choir the way we had it in a very long time. Okay, so what? Now what? And I believe it took me a year to say this, but like as I'm embracing this year, and we're back to opening the shuls tonight, and it's going to be the same story. 11 people coming into shul in a 750 seat shul, sitting around the room, each one 8 meters apart because everybody doesn't want to get COVID, and because we're safe conscious, and we're going to fetch about because there's no coffee these days, and there's no brachas, and this, that, and yeah, it's not what we're used to. It's not what we like. It's not comfortable. Now what? Because to be human means that yes, life is messy, but we don't get lost in its messiness. We don't allow the messiness to consume us. We could stand above it. Yes, when we have to go back into life, it's messy. You show up and you wake up in the morning and you realize you're still in the same complex. The marriage is complex, and your kids are complex, and your sister's complex, and your health is complex, and your finances are complex. Everything's complex. Fine. But I don't have to be in it all day. You know what they used to say, that one of the reasons why Torah says not to eat a pig is because the pig doesn't only walk in mud, it gets into the mud. It rolls and covers itself. It gets into the whole dirt and the manure and everything. And like that, for that, like that's disgusting. Zainish tachazer, don't be a pig. Don't roll in the messiness. Don't get so covered in that you just turn around and head to toe, I'm just covered in mud, in soot and mud. Stand above it. I'm talking to myself. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm talking to myself. Don't be the chazer. By the way, you know what chazer means? It means returns. It just returns. It goes back and back and back. It just goes over and over and over and over and over. By the way, it also means that the chazer is going to return to be kosher when Mashiach comes. But that's a story for another time. But don't get in it. Or like the dog that's always rushing ahead but looking back. Don't look back. Don't look at what used to be and what was and my ideal life. It is. It is. This is the life we have right now. And it could still and must be beautiful. It must be rich. It must be inspiring. It must be causing us to smile. We have to be able to feel joy in these moments. And that's the challenge. The challenge is every day to say, how can I be joyous? How can I stay above it? How can I not just swim and get back into the mud? Yes, life is not a story. It isn't. Not always is there a beginning, a middle, of an end. We don't know how COVID's going to end. It's going to end, but we don't know how. But right now, it's not about waiting for the end. The end is going to come when it has to come. Right now, we're in the middle. We're in the thing. But this is actually where the story really takes place. This is where life really tests us. This is where we can really make a story out of this thing. We can create our own end. We can create some form of closure. We can create some form of meaning. We can bring our own narrative into this event. And as I always said to this group over the years, it's COVID now. Maybe you should write your story. And maybe you'll find in your story a beginning, a middle, of an end. And even if it doesn't, it will still be a great read. I'm waiting.